And so this is the UX handoff for the code quality category, testing handing off to SAST. I put together a quick agenda and link to it in the invite. There is a UX transition issue that I pulled some things out of. We can go through the issue, we can go through the agenda. Some of my key things that I want to talk about today are just making sure that there's shared understanding about where we're at in code quality and kind of what our roadmap looks like and why for the next couple of milestones. There's some things in there that are important to us as a group in Verify that may not be important to you as a group in Secure. And so we can probably back burner those or put those into the backlog, especially around things like performance indicators. If we're transitioning this out of our PI and it isn't going to fit into yours, it doesn't make a lot of sense to continue moving forward with some of those issues. So I wanted to get a touch base on that, talk to you about where we're at in our current category maturity research that is kind of in flight, and then just touch on real quick some of the other administrative stuff, triage issues, documentation ownership, things like that. See who else we need to loop into this and some things we need to take care of just so things aren't lingering on either side. So with that in mind, should we open up the UX transition issue since this started as a UX handoff? Or do you want to just start talking through where we're at in the backlog? Becca, I'll pose that question to you since you're our UX rep here.
I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. What do you have an opinion either way, James?
Yeah, I would start with kind of what's scheduled for us. And as we're talking through that, we might dig into some issues and look at the UX there and see where it's at.
That's
okay.
Sure.
I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen just so we're all looking at the same thing. See if I can find the right way to do that. So we should be looking at the agenda doc. So just talking through what's currently scheduled. What we're working on then in the current milestone is our MVC around showing code quality violations in the MR diff. And this is the implementation where we show just in the header of the different files that have changed that there's a new code quality violation that's associated with the MR. It was introduced as part of that merge request so that someone can click into that, go into the widget and see what the problem is. And that is in flight right now. I think we're in our workflow is in dev, but it's really in verification. This should be ready to go soon. Oh, I'm sorry. This is not the issue I was talking about. This is the full annotation that is in dev. We anticipate this carrying over into 14.0 and then actually having the inline treatment of things. Let's see, I think we have the design here. And Becca and Taylor, I think you weighed in on this as we were going through the process because we anticipated that the SAST scans would take this as well.
Yep.
So that,
do you know, is the code review team aware of this? I know that they're trying to slow down a lot of changes happening in the MR.
Yeah, we talked to Phil and Pedro both quite a bit about this early on in the process. From a performance standpoint, we're tackling this much the same way we did the adding the test coverage annotation there, or the test coverage visualization. So this is a pipeline artifact as opposed to a job artifact. All the processing is happening on the back end. So from a performance standpoint, there should be minimal impact here. And Becca, I know you're looking at, as you incorporate the SAST stuff into this, making it an option to turn off this visual indicator. That I think that would clean up some of that for folks who don't want to have that as part of their MR review experience. All the feedback that we got around, I want to use code quality and I'm putting this job into place, is that I want it because of code review. And so this is the place that I'm looking for it and where it's the most helpful. So I would expect that not a lot of folks who put the job into their GitLab CI YAML turn off the feature, but yeah, there could be a sliver of folks or a majority of folks out there that we haven't talked to that is the right use case for them.
So were there any documented like research findings? Do you know if like solution validation was done on the proposed designs that are being implemented? Is there any way that I can like access any of that feedback or research findings?
Research, what did we do from a research perspective? I'm blanking on what we did for research for this. I know that internally, let's see, thinking back now, like 12 months ago when we started talking about this, we did interviews internally because we're moving from minimal into viable. And so all of the problem validation and solution validation would have been with internal stakeholders, probably a lot of it very ad hoc and not recorded in the traditional manner. From a solution validation standpoint, I would say we did that through the issue, again, with our internal stakeholders, pinged the folks who are on the dogfooding issue or the team within Create, within source code and code review to look at this and validate, hey, is this A, not too intrusive, but B, also solving the use case that we're looking to solve of I am doing a code review. I see that code quality violations have been added to it. I have enough information to leave a comment on how to fix it or just address it. So those were kind of the things that we were trying to solve for, the problem we're trying to solve, and how we went about validating that this would be a good solution for it. And I think that all of that should be linked up through the issues, but I'll try to surface that a little bit better in our agenda, if that works for you. Okay.
Yeah, that sounds good. So just for transparency, I in 14.0 am going to be doing solution validation of the solutions that I've come up with that integrate SAST and considering, in the future secret detection and possibly some other findings as well. So I've talked to Pedro here and there one-on-one, and he's really pushing for thinking about this in terms of a framework and thinking more holistically rather than just a solution for code quality, SAST and secret detection. But if there's more teams in the future who want to jump on board, how can we accommodate that? So
Sure.
I have a solution validation issue open that I will add to this agenda as well. So more research to come in.
Cool. All right. So that is what's lined up for 13.12, 14.0. The other item in 14.0, and this is where I think the roadmaps might diverge, is tracking for users who view that. Code quality and code quality on the code quality annotations is an ultimate tiered feature. So that would go for us into PGMAU, which is what we're tracking. And we're tracking PGMAU a little bit different than everyone else. We're actually tracking users who aren't just at an ultimate tier or at a paid tier using a feature, but users who are using a paid feature. Sounds like the same thing, but is tracked very differently. I don't think that is the performance indicator for the secure team or for the SAST team, or the SAST group rather. So if not, then we would probably put a pause on this because it's not going to contribute to our performance indicators after this handoff is done and get some space back in that milestone, especially with all the deprecations that are happening. And Taylor, I'd put that question to you of how does this contribute to your performance indicators?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've looked at your PI page and I don't have a good sense of how that's going to transition. Today, Secure largely looks at job runs. And so, we easily could just look for the job name code quality and that contribute to it. I don't think that's, necessarily the most valuable. We are trying to transition some of that to more specific, like how many vulnerabilities are being tracked and how many users are interacting with those. So your issue here does kind of point to that sort of transition of metrics. So it might make sense to keep planning to do this.
Okay. We do have usage ping tracking for how many users look at the full report on the pipeline page. That's primarily been our kind of big ticket, our big driver for PGMAU. It's at least half every month of our users. And so you'll get that as part of the transition. And the team was looking at instrumenting the same way through usage ping. So you'd have both SaaS and self-managed for this.
Okay, yeah, that's the one I saw. And I think that's measured in hundreds of users right now.
Yeah. Part of that is, I'm going to skip ahead and then jump back. What we found is that users don't know that data's there, that full report. that surfaced through discussions we've had informally with users, Twitter, forum, and then the last interviews that I did last week with some internal stakeholders of trying to figure out where we're at maturity-wise on code quality, asking them to find the full report. Neither of the users who are internal GitLab employees could find it. They just didn't know it was there. And so that's one of the issues that we have here is adding a link from the widget to the full report, because that'll drive additional eyeballs and additional PGMAU. We think is some low-hanging fruit to bump that number up.
Yep.
Yep. All right, so then jumping back in, really after that, the annotation and the MR diff, the big thing for us would be getting away from code climate. And for that, we need a MVC for a non-code climate scan. As we've been talking about this as a group, we think that doing something like Rubocop or one of the JS linters is going to be something immediately internally valuable and is going to validate for us that we can do a scan, translate that into the code quality JSON so that we don't have to change all of the other features as well, and then get that parity at least for one language or two languages. So that was how we were approaching that MVC. We think that we probably should, in the spirit of being, good teammates, continue down that path and finish that up so we can at least hand that off to the team. That also gets us out of the Docker and Docker. Unfortunately, it wasn't as easy, or it wasn't as seemingly as easy as it was for SAST to get away from D&D, just because the code climate engine requires it so heavily. So that would be the other big thing that I would point at of we should finish this before we complete our handoff as far where it comes to code quality.
Okay, so even once that is done, there would still be certain languages which would need Docker and Docker.
The way that we've been thinking about it is create a new template that is a non-Docker and Docker template, something that just, and maybe we take a really big step and say, we're just going to run superlinter as part of this and then translate all of that into a codeclimate.json. Once the report is uploaded, like you're fine, you're done. You don't even need to really run the scan as part of your, I mean, you need to run it as part of your pipeline, but if you upload it and ran it somewhere else, it would work the same way. All of the features would continue to work the same way is what I am trying to say.
Okay, and then from a technical perspective, y'all don't have any sort of comparison between pipelines or jobs. It's always just purely rendering whatever's in the report.
The merge request widget does that diff. So from the commit on the base pipeline compared to, or from the target pipeline compared to your source pipeline, that's where it shows that diff, yeah. And then that's what's going to display as part of the MR diff, where it's just the new violations that are found or what is showing up there. So if you have one new violation in one file that you changed and you introduced it, that is what is going to display there, not every violation in that file. So it gives you contextually, what can I act on because I just introduced this and I need to fix it to get back to a good state.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll plan on continuing to move forward with that MVC in 14.1. The next couple probably aren't as super important. The group files, group issues by file, that should be pretty straightforward. Within that, we've sorted by severity. Now we want to just, pull everything together by file so things are a little bit easier to look at. The link from the MR widget to the full report that I mentioned, and then support for multiple reports. This is support for multiple reports. We fixed this for, I think, the widget, but not for the full report. Yeah, in the full code quality report. If somebody is running multiple linters and then they spit out into a codeclimate.json, and you can do that in multiple jobs, we'll only take the last one today. So this functionality will say, give me all of those, put them all together, and then display all of those results. We see this most prominently with ESLint, of folks running multiple ESLint jobs, transforming them, and then trying to upload them as a code quality artifact. So that one we could push off. The work is pretty well documented of what needs to be done. The team has this done already for the MR widget. It would just need to be done for the full report. So Thomas Taylor, looking at those, is there anything that sticks out as probably don't need to do, would want a back burner?
I mean, in full transparency, my intention is basically to freeze this until we get VET implemented, which is our proprietary SAST scanner. So it's probably going to be 14, mid 14x by the time we get around to having capacity to do code quality. So
Sure.
I kind of leave that question more to you of, do you think the users we have are willing to wait? Or do you think that that would block sort of the ability for us to continue growing usage of this?
Yeah. If we enable support for multiple reports that feeds into the full report, I could see some users are just going to pick up their own linters, run them, and upload the artifacts. And then they get all of that code quality artifact goodness, or the code quality goodness, especially in the MR diff. That's going to drive some ultimate usage for you. So that could be a good thing. I would pick that up, drop the two above that, the grouping and the MR widget to full. I'd anticipate that most of the usage you're going to pick up from that support for multiple reports is going to be around the MR diff. So if we do those two things, enable the diff to show all of the new violations, and then let you upload your own reports across multiple jobs, that's going to be the best place or the best way to go forward.
Okay, I tend to agree with that. And that also, yeah, that would drive ultimate revenue rather than just core usage, which I still need to sort of like reconcile where we're at with SAST being available in core and what that looks like for code quality. I suspect we'll probably just mirror those. But yeah, okay, I agree with that.
Cool.
From a post-sales point of view, if you don't mind me asking, customer escalations, what's your biggest source? And do you have any?
Yeah, the biggest source of escalations comes from TAMs, it comes from TAMs. And primarily it's they can't get the widget to show up. By and large, that is due to there isn't actually a base report there to compare against for any number of reasons. It's expired. They have started their branch not off of that commit on the base. We've done a lot of work in trying to better expose the errors of why you don't have a base report, or why it looks like you might have a base report, but it's not actually what we're comparing against. So the team we've continued over the last couple of milestones to iterate on that and try to improve the experience. Ultimately, what we got to was we don't want to guess at which report you want to try to compare against, because that's worse than just not showing you anything. It's showing you something that's incorrect. So that would be the most, but I'll get maybe one ping a week in Slack. So it's not a huge volume of escalation.
And the solution basically is just run a job wherever that base is that you've got the report, and it'll show up.
Yep. Rebase and try again is usually what we say.
Okay.
If you search the forums, because there's a lot of interaction there, the MR widget is in core, and so we get a decent amount of interaction there. That you'll find some of our threads and how to resolve it. Yeah, that would be the biggest escalation as far as troubleshooting. The biggest escalation as far as what they want next is getting away from Docker and Docker, because for folks who can't use it for whatever reason, security, whatnot, it's just slow to load. That's the biggest point, and that's maybe 1 or 2 pings a week I'll get about, hey, when are we getting rid of Docker and Docker? Can't you guys just do what SAST did? Which we tried, we just code climate won't let us. All right. The content or the current maturity research, I've conducted 2 interviews internally as we're moving from minimal to viable. Once that MR got approved last week, though, I put a pause on that. But the Dovetail project is linked there as well as the issue. I'm going to close that issue out probably at the end of this week. But that research is there, the insights are there, the interviews are uploaded if you want to take a look. But with us handing the category over, I'm just going to put a pause on it and your team can pick it up and run with it as you see fit. I was scheduled to move this from minimal to viable in Q2. So at least you're in a spot where you can continue that if you want to take that on, or if, like you said, you're really working on vet and want to just put a pause on this, you can extend that out as part of a direction update. No worries.
So you've already completed the
Completed
research. So
two
why
out
would
of
we
the,
not?
yeah, I've got 2 interviews done. I was running into having a hard time finding internal folks to interview for this.
Okay, how many do we need at this stage? Is it still the 5?
I think I've been trying to get at least 4. I think I used for my last category that moved
Okay.
for minimal. I think 5 is preferable though, yeah.
Okay, and the 2 that you did, were they mature scores? Or were
The
they
scores are
just
in there.
during-
For what I was scoring on was, can you get what you need out of the MR widget? And that scored well enough that it would move forward. For the other secondary job that I was more curious about than actually doing the research on, it was the full report, finding it, and that scored very, very poorly.
Okay.
So I can leave that issue open and just transfer ownership of it as well if you want to just
Yeah,
take
that's
it.
probably the easiest thing to do.
Okay, I'll just do that. Cool. And then the
Hey,
other
Becca,
administrative
we
stuff.
skipped.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Thomas.
Sorry, Becca, we skipped one of your questions. Did you
Oh,
want to
I
get
am
that
so sorry. I'm
answered?
not doing a good job of keeping an eye on the agenda.
Yeah, that's okay. Thank you, Thomas. I was just wondering if you have any MRs with code quality findings. I haven't yet had time to go through the entire transition, UX transition issue that that Hayana opened, but I'm just trying to get a sense of what these findings look like. I don't know if you have any example MRs or designs or anything like that, so I can see, because every MR I've been to so far in the GitLab project anyways, I'm not seeing any findings.
Yeah, I can, and that goes back up to your solution validation question, I think, that I skipped over a long time ago. Sorry, is the question with code quality moving into static analysis, that question, or am I missing another one?
Another one below.
Okay. Got it. Yep. Yeah, I can link you over to some examples, no problem.
That'd be great.
Just gonna give myself a to-do in the Google Doc.
Yeah, I think my other questions are in the administrative section below, which also touches on my question above. I'm just not very clear at the moment anyways on what transitions exactly. There's the configuration page, or I assume we're not adding code quality to that. We have a security configuration page. We also have a vulnerability report. I'm guessing we're not adding code quality findings into that since they're not necessarily security vulnerabilities. But do we move it in the documentation? It's currently under the testing category. So I guess just not sure how the internal transitions, not wanting to ship the org too much, but just wondering internally versus, you know, surfacing this to users.
Sure.
Where do we categorize this?
Yeah, and I mean, the calculus behind the move was, as we looked more and more at our roadmap, everything that we wanted to build was already built by SAST. And as we talked to customers, they wanted to replace single point solutions with 2 categories from GitLab. And so we were shipping the org chart as opposed to shipping a real solution or an outcome for those customers. And so it makes a lot of sense to roll what was emerging into what is already there from a customer's perspective, because all of our roadmap lined up with, like I said, what you've already built in SAST. So just taking it there. The documentation and just the moving of bits, we can definitely move that over into the SAST category. And then I would hand it off to Taylor as far as how this incorporates into the vulnerability report. Really, customers point at that as that's the kind of report that we want with our code quality information in it as well. Just take that and stick it in that report. That's what they've asked for. What outcome they're really driving for, though, is going to need some, some of the normal research and making sure that we understand what they're actually trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I think initially we'll probably update the configuration page to just have the static text to the documentation to get it turned on. I think that should be an easy lift and help customers really like understand that it's part of our security tools. In terms of the vulnerability report, I don't think we're going to change that anytime soon. Unclear to me what the UX should do with this. I think I see a future where we join this with the security report, but I'd rather keep it separate at the moment and just treat it as two separate widgets. At some point, we'll reconcile that. And I think part of this depends on where we go with the engines themselves. Like, if we transition to ESLint or some of the tools that we already use today, that makes that transition maybe a little bit easier for us to do. But there's UI and things that we don't have in SAST today that I think really kind of makes me question how quickly we try to join these things together.
Cool.
Actually, that's a good question. So in configuration, is this really just include the code quality CI template and it generally works?
Yep. Include the template.
Okay.
You need to merge into your default pipeline and then branch off of that, and then you'll get the MR widget. On that first pipeline run, though, you'll get the full report on the pipelines tab or on the pipelines page.
Yeah, okay, so just like security. So yeah, that should be pretty easy then. And certainly once we get rid of Docker and Docker, that'll help a lot.
Yeah, that's the big hurdle for folks.
CI file, that CI file is included in Auto DevOps as well.
It is.
Okay.
This may sound like a niche question, but coming from static analysis land, I have to ask it. Offline environment support, is that a requirement for code quality?
It is not if you're hosting the code climate Docker image or container image on your local registry. So we have instruction on how to do that on the documentation page.
Excellent. Okay. So that'll reconcile with us pretty easily.
Yep. And we have a community contribution right now that we're working through to also improve the Docker rate limits or Docker Hub rate limiting because we're hitting Docker Hub, or some folks are still set up to hit Docker Hub. So there's a workaround that we're going to add in that will help with that.
Okay. Well, actually, that's a good question. Do we need to transition where that Docker image is hosted for us?
We're now hosting on the GitLab registry as opposed to taking it from the Docker Hub registry.
Okay. Can you link me to that project?
Yeah.
I'm wondering if maybe we need to transition that to the security group, but also like, that's probably not worthwhile.
I will, instead of trying to do this right now, I will do it in a little bit. There's my triage issues today. Our verify triage issue got blown up with a bunch of code quality stuff that was didn't have a category because the category has changed. So I'll open a request with engineering productivity to get that fixed. That was the thing that triggered me to say, hey, we should talk about administrative stuff. Other than that, I think most everything is wrapped up, or we can finish it off in the next couple of days or weeks.
Okay.
Cool. All right. So it looks like we have a couple of takeaways here. I'm going to post this up on Unfiltered for the folks who were unable to attend. And as we get finished up with some of those last couple issues, we'll get set up to do a engineering handoff as well. Thomas, if you guys want to pair up on anything during that time, just let us know.
Thank you.
All right.
Cool. Awesome.
All right. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Cheers.